Vocalo Radio, Chicago's only urban alternative, 91.1 FM. Nudia in the afternoons here with you. I love something about our city. I love that this is the birthplace of Chicago house music. It's been something that has been so much fun to hear and learn about. And with summer coming up, it just gets you in the vibes. There is a very special podcast right now that is happening in our city. House Music Chicago Testimonies is now live, capturing firsthand stories from the pioneers who built the scene. And in studio to talk to us about it, DJ Lori Branch and DJ Hannah Vitigrrl. Hello.
Hey.
Thank you guys so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having us.
I do have to say, as a, now I'm starting to say I'm from Chicago, but as a transplant, I was like, I need to listen to this. I was like, this is going to help me a lot because it is so amazing. I remember when I was moving here, all the DJs I knew were like, I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous you're going to Chicago. Like, the music scene is just so great out there. What really started this conversation for you guys to want to kind of do this anthology, like kind of like go through the history of house music and with your friends and, DJ acquaintances?
Well, any chance that I get to work with Hannah Vitigrrl is always just a pleasure. Mm-hmm. And I think we were looking for something that we could do together. I have been doing house music history for a long time on WNUR's Street Beat show. So every week, we get to talk to folks, and we were documenting a lot of that. And then what started happening is that the people who we were interviewing, honestly, were moving, disappearing. Several of them died. And I'm like, okay, I have to have a more formalized way to do this than the weekly show that was more of conversational. Like, how do we really dig into the stories and capture this in a much more professional way? And that's where Hannah came in.
Yeah, it's a pretty special full circle moment for me. We talk about it in the first episode of how Lori and I actually met, but it was while I was a graduate student at Northwestern, and I had a radio show that was before Lori's show, this show that she was just speaking of. And so, the world, I don't think there's really coincidences. I think things are meant to be. And it was an opportunity for me to see what Lori was doing. And, obviously I was so impressed by the folks that were coming in that I knew, and there were plenty that I didn't know. And to Lori's point earlier, I think there's something so lovely about a radio format like we're doing right now that's it's intimate and it's conversational, but it's not always highly edited and highly produced. And I really, through the last 5 years of working and getting close to Lori, have come to see, how much thought she puts into how she shows up to the interviews. And I just had this dream to highly produce Lori and this work. I mean, when I was a grad student, the projects I decided to do happened to be on house music. And I remember lovingly one of my professors, who's not considered a house head, was like, I love this work, but I think there's a little bit missing here on why this matters. And while that was good feedback for a producer, I think it's there are so many of us that you don't need to tell us why it matters. And so it just is the only thing that matters for so many of us house heads. And so when Lori, told me that she was going to apply for a grant and had, I don't even think you asked. I think you just told me.
You're going to be doing this.
And I said, thank you. And that was kind of what brought this project to life in those early days. But then it's all the parsing out of now, what do we actually want this to sound like? Mm-hmm. Who's it for? How do we embody these stories and these narratives? And for me, I think there's something so special is that, yes, it's an anthology and an archive, but it's really done in a way that is only that Lori could capture some of these stories because she was there and because she has this history, these years of trust built with so many of these people. So the way that they're going to show up to her interview is really different than they're going to show up to someone who they don't really know or who doesn't have that same stake in the community.
Yeah. And I think that vulnerability is something I don't take for granted, that they're telling stories that they're I know they wouldn't tell other folks that, but, we have that level of trust with each other. So it's made it very special. There's some really interesting, deep, personal stories.
I do think at this point it is very important to hear from people that were there when things started. Mm-hmm. We hear stories, from DJs that were there when hip hop was coming out of the Bronx, and then seeing this, that it kind of reminded me of that. I'm like, yeah, it is so important that, while people are still here, we still need to hear these stories about how this music was created, because it wasn't that long ago.
No.
People will think it was a long time ago. It's like, no, there's people here like when it all started.
That's right.
And also how it came together,
Yeah.
What was kind of the most important message to have in this podcast? Because not only have we said house music is important, to some people it's everything, but also learning the history. But what else did you really want listeners to take away from this?
Well, many things, but one is that, we as Chicagoans should be proud of this creation because it came from Chicagoans. And it is a worldwide phenomenon that there are people all over the world who get inspired from what happened here in the late 70s and early 80s, the house music culture, then later the canon, meaning the music that was produced by these young guys and young women across the city, the south side, the west side, north side. But, it's from us. It was for us, by us, that really got exported and became something much larger than any of us would imagine. I was literally just talking to Jesse Saunders, who's credited with creating one of the first house tracks, if not the first one, that was sort of recognized as in this new canon just before we got here. And he was just so proud. He was like, I just posted something. It got 50,000 views. Who knew this little thing would get so big? I'm like, we didn't. We were just kids, but, so happy that it did. So I want people to be proud of that. It's not just our story, it's our story. It's Chicago's story.
So looking at because it is very well produced. I've gotten to listen to some of it, and you sent over clips before we started this interview. Did you guys film the whole season?
Well, so it's recording,
at a time?
It's audio, and we didn't throughout a period. But the first two interviews, Robert and Craig, were actually taken from Lori's radio show, which provided some interesting, challenges in a good way, like anything. But the other interviews were all taken. One was at your home, 2 were at Bridgeport Records. So most of them were within a period of time. But then, I had the honor of working with Lori at her dining room table to really go through, this is how we write for audio, because a lot of folks who haven't had the pleasure of working on an audio project before, you kind of just think, the way you write is the way you write for the ear. And really it isn't. And Lori is such a great writer. It was both beautiful and a little scary at first to kind of feel like I was meant like our roles, reverse mentoring, kind of coaching her.
She became, my mentor.
The student has become the teacher.
Oh my God! in so many ways, Hannah's being really humble about it, but she really did shape this into what it sounds like, and made it as professional and good as it is, with the music, with, just even coaching me on sort of how to deliver the message, and how, when I'm doing fresh interviews, to listen, because it's much more, back and forth, people stepping on each other, when you're in a studio. But, when you're doing this interview and really trying to extract this level of detail about people's lives and their histories, you got to give them room to breathe. Anyway, she was my coach.
And I'm a big student of oral history. And so oral history is a whole very technical, actually, way of interviewing and way of archiving someone's story, their narrative. And while this isn't technically all of an oral history, because there's some things by the books that are different, that was really the ethos for us, I believe, was taking an oral historian's approach. And that looks and sounds really different. So something we decided early on is like, we're not super concerned with saying that one of our guests' narrative is untrue because it doesn't align with another guest's narrative or a moment in time, right? Like there's already this understanding, we talk about it early on, that we believe many things can be true at once, and that memory and the way it meets time and the way it meets meaning kind of create what the story is that we tell. And so we really want to honor those narratives of the people, the way that they feel them and the way they express them, while still trying to create, an archive in the sense of, if you want to place somewhere in time. But I think the idea of just how do these interviews feel different, not only for us as the producers, for the person walking away. Like, we want to honor what they're sharing with us.
That's right.
And I think a lot of times, there's a lot of, now, gratefully, there's movies on Chicago House or different, scenes like the DJs and in Harlem in the beginning. But what I love about a podcast is we're not competing to be in one hour thing to try and tell the whole entire story. And in a world where I think you're praised for the shortest clip and the most visual possible, a podcast like this really asks you to sit and take your time and to kind of, swim in the contradictions. And that's something that I love as a historian.
No, it is very different for radio because most commercial radio stations, you have like 3 minutes of talking is a lot, you know? Luckily here at Vocalo, that's one thing I love about being here is we're able to have these conversations. Actually able to sit down and get somewhere because sometimes the longer you sit, you really go places.
That's right.
That you're not going to get to in the first 5 minutes. People get comfortable. People start remembering things. More stories come. And that's really when you get the time on there, I would really love to hear. I would love to hear from you guys, some of the guests you have coming on, because I know you have some great guests. But I'd also like to hear from each of you, like, one of your favorite stories from recording. Like, well, you're like, oh my gosh, when this happened, when someone said this about this moment, that was it.
Yeah. Well, I can talk about the guests that we feature for this first season. Robert Williams, arguably, an architect of house music. He was the person who owned and operated the Warehouse and brought Frankie Knuckles from New York to Chicago. We have Craig Loftus, who was an early DJ, a friend of mine, a producer. We have Dajae, who's also a very well-known singer. You know the song Brighter Days. Ooh, oh, I need. Anyway, that's what she's very well known for. But she's also not someone you'd recognize on the street. So her story, like, to me, is a surprise or something that stood out for me was when she talked about that. She's like, nobody knows who I am, but they know her voice. That you know it. Everyone knows that. We also have Disco Tony Shelton. We call her Disco Tony, but she's like the first female promoter, like, in the house music scene. Way back when I started, we were kids together. And then finally, we have Vic Lavender, and Vic Lavender is the co-owner of Bridgeport Records in Bridgeport. So he was kind enough to let us actually use his space for the interviews.
Oh, wow.
And he is a deep house music producer. He owns the record store. He's just got an incredible story.
Yeah, and each single episode, a few different stories come up to me. So it's hard to pick one. But, I'll just say, for example, Tony Shelton, Disco Tony Shelton. Like, I didn't know who she was, right? And I'm pretty plugged in as a DJ. And I think it showed me, first of all, I remind myself of this all the time. Like, we didn't reinvent the wheel, and there's so much richness that kind of gets overlooked also when we only focus on the DJ, right? To make house music happen, to make it the culture that it has become, there's so many different players and people involved. And so you learn about her at age 16, taking photos of herself and realizing that, like, if I put this on a flyer, like, the girls will want to come because they'll feel safe it's a girl, but then the guys are going to want to come because they, like, might want it. She just had all these different ways of figuring out how to market this party through herself. And then she would skip school and go to all of the different high schools in the area. Her photos next to Michelle Obama in the yearbook, and she didn't go to that school, but she happened to be there on picture day, like, handing out flyers. They used to call them pluggers back in the day. But yeah, every single episode, there's something so rich, and also it's just a reminder that sometimes these, like, mundane or things that we're just doing because it's, like, the thing to do that day. Lori has this line in the podcast I think about all the time, like any group of loosely aimed youth. And I think it's a great way of thinking about it. It's just like at one point we're just people and kids following the things that we like to do, and then we trip and fall, and we are, like, in the middle of culture.
Of a movement.
Yeah.
Looking forward, do you guys see yourself continuing this anthology series for a long time?
Most definitely. This is just the beginning, and I think it was sort of a test run for us. And not to say that it's, testy. It's great. It's great. It's complete. These stories are wonderful. And we know that we are scratching the surface, that there's so many more stories of Chicagoans, so many more stories of Chicagoans who helped to build Chicago House. And I want to tell as many as possible.
Me too. And I think it's the kind of thing that often when things are reduced down, and especially when we're talking about, like, marginalized cultures and communities, like, normally there's only gets to be, like, one or maybe two people that gets to have their story told. And so my real passion and excitement gets to think about, like, as we continue, all the people who've never had their stories shared like this, and the meaning that will make for them, but also how much richer it's going to make our understanding of this culture.
And I also love, because I reading the press release of releasing this, during Women's History Month, because I can only imagine, I can't wait to hear some of these episodes, because I can only imagine, I know it's like for DJs and female promoters in 2026, I can only imagine how crazy it was in the 70s and 80s.
It was tough.
Yeah, because it's, I feel like it's still male-dominated industry.
Of course.
But I mean, back then, like, I'm sure it was like extremely male-dominated, right?
Of course it was. I mean, things haven't changed that much. We have many, many more DJs and promoters, I'm really excited to see that now. But back then, it was few and far between. And so the people that we talked to, Daje, Disco Tony, other females who we're going to interview, were part of a very small, it was a thin air. There was not a lot going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
DJ Celeste, hopefully she's going to be on our next round. Yeah.
You'll hear in episode 1, once you all listen, that, Lori Branch won the first all-female DJ battle. So that kind of put her on the map, I would say.
Oh, I think, and it's funny because you guys were some of the first guests we had in our new Vocalo studio.
Yes.
And I still remember some of those stories, right? You said like boys would get mad at you, right, for beating them.
Well, that's across the board.
Okay, on so many levels.
And it's only gotten worse, guys. Okay, you're gonna have to step your game up if you're around Lori Branch.
But it's you hear through this work though how many men have supported Lori and have supported the community, and we get into like LGBTQ and what was happening, kind of zooming out economically in these neighborhoods at the time, the racial dynamics of the city, right? Like there's so much in this story of house music, and so many people that just, it's relational, right? Like it's all relational.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because we do get into community. So we spend a lot of time talking about Chicago, what was happening in our politics, what was happening in our neighborhoods. And so it's not just the lens of house music. You don't have to be a house music fan. I mean, and that was the goal, is to make this accessible to Chicagoans, to understand like why this period was so important and what was happening to influence it. Could it have come at a different time? Maybe not. There was a lot of oppression in the early 80s. We had a very, difficult political landscape. We had, not a lot of places where young people could be and be themselves. We had a lot of pressure on LGBTQ communities. We had HIV. We had a bunch of, hard things going on. And out of it, we create this diamond that we call house music. So it's pretty cool to think about it within the context of what was happening in the city at that time. Harold Washington was our mayor. So many cool things.
I feel like that's the perfect out. Like that's just like the perfect quote to go out on, because I mean, the more that we keep reminding people that house music was brought to you by Chicagoans, and more importantly, Black and brown and queer Chicagoans.
That's right.
The more that we always have that message going out, I think is so important for our youth. And I love that we get into what Chicago was like when house music was coming up. If you're just tuning in, we're here with DJ Lori Branch, DJ Vitigrrl on House Music Chicago Testimony. It is now available. Where could people listen?
Anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, all the major hitters.
Well, thank you guys so much for stopping
so much.
by.
I really appreciate all your support.
And let's get back to the music. It's Vocalo Radio.